We're going to be writing the high of our little break there into another warm-up response for our creative writing piece. Now, this is going to be about introducing you to the creative writing prompts that I discussed a little bit earlier. Now, these are great activities to be participating in if you are if you're interested in working on your creative writing skills outside of the set texts that you have been prescribed at school, or the set writing activities that you're doing in class. So there are literally thousands to be found online. They're really easy. Just type into Google creative writing prompts and you will see all kinds there available for you to get involved in. This one that I have on the screen is one of my very favorites. So it's imagine you are a piece of art hanging on a gallery wall. What do you see from your perspective up there on the wall? Who is in the gallery? What are their reactions to you in particular? Now, the challenge here is to try and give the audience, whoever is reading the piece, a sense of what type of art you are, what it is you depict, using only the reactions of the gallery visitors. So how are they responding? What are they saying to the people they are with? What are their facial expressions? What are their body postures? Are they confused? Are they intrigued? Do they have some sort of really visceral emotional response to it? So it's definitely an interesting task. I'm going to give you guys about 4 minutes. It's a challenge definitely to be writing in a shorter span of time. So go ahead and have a go. Generally, you might want to spend a little bit of a longer time. It allows you to solidify your ideas and be getting down sentences that you're a little bit happier with. But getting the creative juices flowing and perhaps even just coming up with some broad ideas is an excellent start to this task. So 4-minute timer, have a go. If you're not too confident writing in sentence form, that's fine. Just get some dot point ideas down, and perhaps in the future you might return to them to get out a little bit of a story, a longer story. All right, about a minute to go. If you haven't written down anything in sentence form yet, perhaps try and get maybe 1 or 2 down in the last minute. Don't try and restrict yourself to writing something that is really of good or high quality. That's not what this task is about. It's about getting your creative ideas out. Okay. The more you practice doing these creative prompts, the better you will get, not only at writing, not only at vocab and grammar and spelling and all of those good things, but also at coming up with ideas, coming up with creative writing ideas as well. All right, so this particular task within the syllabus is referred to as a creative response to a written text. So it's all about turning a base text, some sort of key theme or key concept from that, into your own original piece of writing. So it's not just as simple as sitting down and coming up with any broad original writing idea. We need to be really targeted about the way that you do that. So, how do you do that? How do you approach that well? Well, first of all, you and the author of the base text need to be well acquainted. This task in particular is all about provoking some sort of emotional response in your reader. You want them to think or feel something by the end of your text. So the first step in being able to do this is to understand how the author of the base text did that with their own audience, which is you. You've read that text. How did you respond to it? What emotion was provoked in you by the end? And what in particular did the author use in order to achieve that? Excuse me. Is it characters? Is it aesthetic features? Is it relationships? What are the specific things that they have used to provoke that response? And how might you be able, to use those in your own piece of writing as well? Now, key concepts. You need to be taking one particular key concept from that base text and using it as a really central mechanism in your own original piece of writing. So it could be a key theme, a main character or their personality, a central setting, the cultural background of the piece, something like that. All of those things play a huge role in how an audience member reacts to a text, so be really mindful when you're choosing that. Your teachers or your school might be particular about what that is. They might choose it for you yourself, or you might have a little bit more freedom. Either way, you need to be thinking intentionally about how you're going to use it. I suggest, if you are given the free rein to choose your own, to pick one that provokes an effect clearly. So be mindful about how you do that. Now, just with any other English task, it's really important that you pick a concept or idea that interests you, something that you yourself would like to read. It's a lot harder to write something in particular that is creative if you feel no real inspiration towards the topic, if it's not something that grips you. So if you don't want your key concept, if you want your key concept to be interesting to you, then be really specific about how you're choosing it. If you don't like smog, if you don't like fancy talk, if you don't like stiff upper lip, don't set your story in the 18th century. It's just not going to fit your tastes. All right, a brief journey into the world of mind maps. Now, we talked about mind maps all the way earlier in the session when I was talking about some resources that you could be using as you study for English. And mind maps in creative pieces are a great way to be planning your ideas, to be getting them all on the page and be finding some clear connections between them as you think of how your story is going to piece together. This mind map is one that I created myself all the way back in a million years ago in 2019 for a task that I was doing, adapting Little Women into my own original piece. So as you can see, there are a few elements that are familiar from the base text. We have the character Jo, we have the character Laurie, and you can see how I have taken and expanded those characters out, thinking about how I might change and adapt them into a new setting. I also have key themes or key elements of the base text on the other side, and again, just branching them out into their own ideas. Now, I've got this idea of best friends between Joe and Laurie that kind of connects them there. And all of these ideas are connected together. Now, I find that when I have something set out visually in front of me, coming up with more ideas or ways of connecting the story together in a clever way is much easier rather than trying to hold all of that information in my head and try and piece it together in that way. Instead, having it out in front of you is a really excellent tool. So even if you don't consider yourself to be a visual learner, when you're planning out a creative task, I encourage you to try this out. I think you might be surprised by how beneficial it can be for you. All right. Now, it's quite easy to get caught up in abstract themes and concepts and pretty colors when you're writing creatively. But at the end of the day, it is the characters, the central characters that actually carry a story. If an audience doesn't connect to the main character, if they don't feel like they can relate to them, then they're not actually going to be interested in the key message that you're trying to share. And that is a big problem in this task. So I want to spend some time now talking about good characters and how to write good characters in your stories. So good characters, at their very core, at their most essential, are believable. Human beings, the ones that we are and the ones that we interact with every day, are not just one thing. They don't like one thing. They don't dislike one thing. They feel a whole spectrum of emotions and are complicated in their pasts. And we're going to discuss in more detail how you might write them this way, this sort of complex background, when you don't have all of the words in the world to create characters of great depth. This means, particularly in the context of a short story, means that they might appear simple, but they gain complexity as the story goes on. You don't have to introduce them as this really complex, deep character right at the beginning. They can become that over time. Their personality comes through not only in the way that they talk, but the way that they act as well. And they aren't bogged down by physical description. You don't have a million words to write a really fleshed out character, so you can't eat up a whole bunch of your words talking about the specific hue of their eyes or the way that their hair looks in certain lighting. You just don't have the time for that. So, to build your very own good characters, there are 3 simple questions that you need to go ahead and answer. Number 1, what do they want more than anything in the entire world? This acts as the motivation of the story. This pushes the story forward. So, give your main character something that they want desperately. Make it personal for them. Number 2, what are they willing to do to get what they want? This enters the tension, the stakes of the story. How far are they willing to go to get what it is they want? And then number 3, this is your plot. This is how the story comes together. How do they plan on getting that thing? What are the actionable steps they are going to take? To make this make a bit more sense, to set it in real context, we're going to talk about a specific example, and we're going to be talking about everyone's favorite emo, depressed, Danish prince, which is Hamlet from Shakespeare's play Hamlet. Now, if we ask our first question, motives, you can tell a lot about a person based on what it is that they want more than anything else in the world. Perhaps a person wants world peace. Perhaps they just want a sensational Vegemite sandwich. Those are 2 very different things, and it gives you a pretty basic idea, a pretty solid idea of the kind of person that they are. In the case of Hamlet, what he wants more than anything is to get revenge for the death of his father and restore order to the kingdom of Denmark. He feels like he has a duty to the kingdom that he is a part of, to the royal family that he is a part of, and to his father as well. So those are the motives that push him forward throughout the story. Next, we talk about willingness. What are they willing to do? So if you want world peace, you might be content just with posting about it on your Instagram story. But if you really want a Vegemite sandwich, you might be willing to murder for it. So we thought we knew those 2 people earlier, but once we talk about willingness, we get an entirely different picture. We begin to understand their depth. And those people that we thought we knew based on their motives actually become someone quite different. So willingness is a really important part of the completion and the creation of a character. So Hamlet is willing to kill people and himself to ensure justice is restored, and he repeatedly reminds the audience of this. So we get a deeper understanding of who he is, this really sense of justice and duty pushing him forward. And then finally we have plans and actions. Sometimes motives and willingness isn't enough. Ultimately, actions are what speak the loudest about who a character is. Hamlet is crippled by self-doubt, fear, and procrastination throughout the entire play, and does a horrible job of restoring order and finding revenge for his father. So we have this idea of this young man that is all about justice, that's all about restoring order, that's all about working hard for his family and his kingdom. But then we see in his plans and actions that he isn't as strong as he originally appears to be, and has all of these internal issues that make him more of a tragic hero than a sort of golden hero for the story. So you can see how you can create real depth and real intricacy to a character just by answering those questions. Now, a lot of students come to me and they say, I don't know how to make my story interesting. I don't know how to make my story feel fresh and unique and new. Now, it's really important to know that your story is not going to be the most original piece of work in the world. You just don't have the time to develop something of that caliber. But if you'd like your story to feel a little bit different from a classical piece, then you can be considering narrative structure. So changing up the way that the story is written. So the most basic form of narrative structure, and the one you're probably most familiar with, is linear or chronological, which means that the events occur in the order that they happened. The opposite to that, or the alternative to that, is a non-linear or fractured story in which time is disjointed. So there are flashbacks and flash forwards all throughout, and things don't occur in the sequence that they happened. Then we have circular stories, where the story ends where it begins. This could be physical, so the character returns to the exact same spot where they began the story, or it could be more abstract, so similar concepts or ideas that are talked about at the beginning are brought up again or brought to completion by the end of the story. We have parallel stories where multiple storylines are occurring at the same time, or frames in which a story occurs within a story. So the most famous example of a frame story is from Hamlet, which we talked about earlier, in which Prince Hamlet creates or throws a play, performs a play within the play Hamlet. So it's sort of Inception vibes. There are two plays happening at the same time. Now, parallel stories and frame stories can be a little bit difficult to achieve within a short story context. You don't have loads of words to execute them. So if you're thinking you'd like to do that, I encourage you to bring that idea to your teacher as early as possible so they can help you bring that to fruition. All right. This is the most basic structure of a short story, and this is a great way to be planning your short story if you're not quite sure where to begin. I like to write out my plan using this exact shape. So I write out the words in this shape, and then I fill in the details of what each of those sections are going to look like around that word. So we start off with our exposition. I'm going to be talking about exposition a little bit more in a moment. Then we introduce our conflict really early in the story, which leads to our rising tension, up to the emotional climax of the story, which is the emotional high point, where the audience doesn't know in which direction the story is going to go. Then we have our falling tension and our resolution. Now you'll note that I haven't written Disneyland, happily ever after, fairy tale, beautiful, birds chirping, happy ending, everyone's great and wonderful and loves each other very much. You don't have to write a happy ending to your story, but you do have to write a resolution where things feel like they have concluded. Cliffhangers are old, they're not cool anymore, they've been overdone. If you feel like you have a really unique, interesting way to write a cliffhanger well, again, take it to your teacher, because I have found that teachers generally don't love them because they're a little bit cliche. So instead, find a way to resolve the story. It doesn't have to be a happy ending, but things do need to feel like they are completed, particularly in the sense that your audience needs to understand what your key underlying message is for them. Just like the author of the base text has a key message they like to get across, you need to have one as well. That is a really important element of senior writing, particularly in your creative piece. You need to have provoked some sort of response in your reader by the end. All right, let's talk about exposition, because it's the first thing that many of you are writing in your story. So stories that start with long descriptions not interesting. It's not allowing the audience to get excited about the story. It's not getting them engaged, and they take up way too much time. So you've probably been told to start in the middle of the action or to start with a bang, but it can be a little bit confusing to understand exactly what that means and what's the point of actually doing that. So, what is the point of doing that? What do expositions actually do? So they get the audience curious. In the start of The Secret History, it goes a little something like this. The snow in the mountains was melting, and Bunny had been dead for several weeks before we came to understand the gravity of our situation. So it starts off, pretty chill. Snow in the mountains, melting, all right? It's becoming spring. We're finishing up the winter months. Someone's dead. Gravity of our situation. What's the situation? Who's Bunny? How did they die? Is Bunny an actual rabbit or is it a person? There's so many questions. It's so interesting. It's so intriguing. The audience immediately wants to know more. Your exposition could also introduce key themes or ideas. So this is a particularly long sentence. This is actually one sentence from A Tale of Two Cities, but it talks about lots of different themes or ideas that are talked about in the book. So wisdom, foolishness, incredulity, light, darkness, despair, this idea of having everything and nothing at the same time. So again, we're introducing key themes that are going to be repeated throughout the story. It could also be an attention grabber like this one from Anna Karenina. Happy families are all alike. Every unhappy family is unhappy in its own way. Or your exposition might be all about setting the events of the story in motion. Mr. Jones of the Manor Farm had locked the hen houses for the night, but was too drunk to remember to shut the pop holes. So this is from George Orwell's Animal Farm. So immediately there's some tension in there. There's something that's gone wrong and that's going to set events in motion that wouldn't have happened if Mr. Jones hadn't made that mistake. And then finally, your exposition can work to orient readers with the narrator of the story or the main character of the story. So from To Kill a Mockingbird, it starts with, when he was nearly 13, my brother Jem got his arm badly broken at the elbow. So we were introduced to this narrator, Jem's sibling, obviously, and Jem himself. And then from The Catcher in the Rye, it says, if you really want to hear about it, the first thing you'll probably want to know is where I was born and what my lousy childhood was like and how my parents were occupied and all before they had me and all that David Copperfield kind of crap. But I don't feel like going into it if you want to know the truth. So we get a real sense of the idea of the voice of the main character, the voice of the narrator. It sets the tone of the story. So those are all different things that your exposition can do. Now, you don't have to try and do all of them at the same time. I encourage you to choose one of them and focus on that, but just note all of the different things that the exposition can help you achieve. All right.